Hello, everyone. My name is Mark LeBlanc, and I happen to be the chairman of Indie Books International. And it is my distinct honor and pleasure to be the host of our podcast for this episode of Marketing with a Book. Not marketing your book, but marketing with a book. At Indie Books International, we believe that marketing with a book, that your book can be the gateway tool to doing more of all of the good work that you are called and compelled to do. We also believe that speaking, either for fee or for no fee in front of a target-rich audience, arguably could be the ultimate marketing strategy. And everything else we do supports those two aims, the tool and the strategy. So welcome to today's episode. We have an amazing guest, one of our authors, Julie Keys, out of Minnesota, almost in my backyard. Devin, will you go ahead and pin Julie so that we can do an interview side by side? Thank you so very much. Julie, nice to have you with us.
Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. Thanks, Mark. You know,
one of my favorite podcasts that I was a guest on was when you interviewed me. And so I've been looking forward to this opportunity to turn the table and get a chance to interview you.
Thank you.
You really have done some good work out in the marketplace, and you have a distinct history of work, and you've written a book titled Poised for Exit. But could you maybe just start by giving us a bit of a window into your world? I would tend to call it your defining story. What got you from where you are to where you are today?
Well, as an entrepreneur for most of my adult life, I have lived with, or lived through, I should say, a lot of the experiences that my clients are living through. And when I went through my own transition, it wasn't the best experience. And so I decided that I wanted to become an advisor to help other business owners have a better experience than what I had. And that was in 2010. And so I started doing some business consulting work at the time. And then I learned about the Exit Planning Institute, and I had started acquiring clients who really needed help in that space, but I knew I didn't know enough about it. And so I went and became certified in exit planning. And then that's my foot forward now. The work that I do is all exit planning related for privately held companies. And I call it my circle of love. And the things that I do that are all kind of connected to that vision of being able to impact as many business owners in my lifetime as I possibly can.
You mentioned, who knew that you could get certified as an exit planner?
Right.
And that there is an association, and believe it's EPI, Exit Planning Institute. You've been recognized as a thought leader of the year twice. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was really an honor. EPI isn't the only credentialing organization for exit planning, but they're probably the biggest. I think they're the best one. I like their methodology the best, but there are two others that would probably be considered pretty close competitors. And I think that EPI, they knew that the work that I was doing was really my life's work. And they knew that I was putting a lot of content out there. And so as we start in this interview, as we kind of start talking about that thought leadership and things that you want to do to create followers, I've been putting out a lot of content and in different ways. And they recognized that. And I think they also recognized the fact that I'm a woman, and they don't have a whole lot of women who are certified exit planners. They have thousands of them, but not as many women as men, and not as many who are actually taking a leadership role in the industry. And so they just recognized me for that twice, which the second time I was pretty surprised.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And certainly well deserved. Now, if I understand correctly,
Mhm.
your work primarily is in financial services, or are you helping entrepreneurs from all walks of life grow and exit?
Well, I wouldn't consider the work that I do in financial services, although I work with a lot of advisors who are. And so when it comes to the process of exit planning, it's complicated sometimes, many times, and it can be really time consuming. And most of the people who are at the table with a business owner in terms of their professional advisory don't really have the bandwidth or the desire to do the kind of work that I do. So when it comes to exit planning, there are a couple of distinctions that are kind of important to know. One would be the owner readiness side, and one would be the business readiness side. And so the owner readiness side would be more that would apply to the personal financial preparedness and de-risking of the owners themselves, in terms of like tax planning, financial planning, estate planning, contingency planning, things like that. Next act planning, like what are we going to do after we sell the business? Because there is life after business. And that's owner readiness. And so I help to coordinate all of that and bring in the different advisors that need to be a part of that collaborative process. I don't do that work, but I help quarterback and, counsel the owner through a lot of that. And then on the business readiness side, I do a lot of that work. And that basically starts with a solid strategic plan. And so the implementation of the strategic plan and then allowing and working with other leaders to bring them up through the ranks, because many times it's going to be an internal transfer. And so we have to make sure that the successors are properly prepared and ready. So there's assessment and all of that too. But basically that is what exit planning is in a nutshell. And then, like I said, bringing in the other advisors, the attorneys, the financial advisors, the CPAs, and working the process together so that the business owner achieves the best outcome.
How I think for most of us, we would think of it as a spreadsheet type transition, but I'm guessing that there's a lot of emotion that goes into transitions.
There is. It's the most overlooked part of exit planning because most advisors don't want to go there. When you think about most business owners, not all of them have been founders. Many of them have been founders, but most of them have been at the wheel for a really long time.
Mhm.
And many times there's some kind of triggering event that causes them to transition from or want to transition from. Sometimes it's a death or a divorce or a disability. Somebody gets sick, or two partners are having a disagreement. We call that the 5Ds: disagreement, divorce, disability. Yeah. Disaster is another one, right? COVID brought down a lot of businesses, unfortunately, and many of them were not ready to pivot or transition. And so they closed down. And so that's why it's important to do these kinds of things ahead of time and work with someone like me ahead of time. And like I said, that the emotional side of it, like what are you going to do? You're selling your business. Life is not over. We have to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say is there a ratio of those owners who transition? I'm not sure of the word, thoughtfully and not due to a trigger event, versus those who have some kind of D type event. Because I would think that when that happens, the danger is a lot can be left on the table.
Absolutely. A lot can be left on the table, sadly, and preventable. But I guess the statistic is 45 to 50% of all owners will suffer from at least one of the 5Ds at some point in their business life cycle. And if they haven't prepared ahead of time to, some kind of contingency planning around that, then they definitely could fall victim to, a bad transition or not having options. No one wants to be backed into a corner and have no options and have someone else dictate how they're going to transition out. And no one wants a liquidation sale after they've been in business for 35 or 40 years. So, protect that nest egg and protect that asset. And, that's my advice.
Well, my experience in the small business world is that a lot of small business owners often think they fall into one of two camps. They often think their business is worth a lot more than it is.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other businesses who have no idea. They will downplay the value of their business. Maybe if they're not as profitable as they want to be. It's like, Mark, there's no value here. And it's like, whoa, Nellie, wait a minute here. You're not, they're so close to it that they're not seeing it.
Right.
What would you say would be the best point on the journey to bring you in or someone like you in without a trigger event?
Let's say 10 years out.
10 years out.
Let's say 10 years out.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is because many privately held companies, owners have this vision that they want to carry on the legacy of their business. And many of them already have designated successors in their family or in their management team. They may or may not have had that conversation with them, but in their mind, that's what they're thinking. They really want to transition. And if that's the case, then we need to find out as early as possible if they actually are candidates for transition. If they're not candidates for becoming the successors of the business, then it's important to know that earlier than later. Finding out, when I'm ready to be out in a year and finding out that my son isn't interested, and I didn't know that because we never had the conversation, means I have to kind of start over and figure out how to make the business ready for a third-party sale. So, but 5 years, even if you have 5, that's better than, that the rule of thumb with a family business is 10 years.
10 years.
Yes. The rule of thumb with a third party sale, meaning selling to an outside party, not internally, is 5 years.
I thought you were going to say 3. So 5 years or even 10 years would I think be ideal.
It really would. It sets the owners up for the best possible outcome because they have time. So it isn't just about getting the business ready. Remember when I said that there's that owner readiness distinction as well? Well, if you're a tax planning attorney, you're going to tell your business owner clients that they need to start tax planning a minimum of 3 years out. Well, you don't just start at the 3-year mark, right? You have to have conversations, meetings, understand from your financial planning experts, what's the best possible path. And that all takes time, a year, 2 years, right? And then you can put those instruments in place, the trusts and things like that ahead of time to shelter yourself from tax when the time comes that you sell your business, because that's what we're all trying to do.
It's complicated.
It is. Yeah.
And I don't know, you and I have met in the last 5 years or 7 years, I believe. You may or may not know that I owned a business from 1982 to 1992.
I do remember that.
It was a creative and printing company, and I sold it at the ripe young age of 31 after building it up over about a 10-year period. And I sold it to pursue my dream of being a professional speaker and, business coach and an author. And, I closed in 1992, and yet it seems like yesterday. But it was a complicated journey or chapter to get that business ready for sale. And even though I was clear on what I wanted to do afterward, one of the fascinating things was after closing, there were things that the buyer, I didn't think did very well. And that,
imagine that.
and that made me angry. It was like, oh my, you're kidding me. You're going to do what?
Yeah.
But on the flip side, she did some things that I'd never even thought of. And that made me angry too. It's like, why didn't I think of that? So at the end of the day, I was angry, both ways. But But it was a successful transition and certainly allowed me to move forward. But there was a real letting go of something that I had worked so incredibly hard for.
I understand. It is really hard.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What do you think when you think about the owners in transition? What tip would you have for an owner who's transitioning out, and what tip would you have for a buyer?
Mhm. For an owner, I would definitely have a very serious conversation with everyone who would be a stakeholder in an exit outside of your staff. You'd have to have that conversation later. It's important to keep some of that stuff confidential because we don't want to scare people, right?
Mhm.
But our family members, our spouses, our significant others, are the people that we would deem as our closest advisors. Those stakeholders, even though they're not shareholders, still have a stake in whether the business succeeds or fails. And if you have someone that you live with, a spouse or a significant other, and you're going to sell your business, you're going to spend a lot of time together after that, right? So what does that look like? Just like you said, you had something all ready to look forward to. And that's what I encourage my clients to do. Talk to your stakeholders, ask them about, not to get permission necessarily, but just, this is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think in terms of my future? Like, where could I spend some time making a difference? And it's amazing what kind of input you can get from people. I actually did that myself. And I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to do, but I wanted to hear what other people had to say. And not one person told me that it was a bad idea. So I needed to hear that. And I think having something to look forward to from an owner's perspective is everything, because when you don't have to set the alarm anymore in the morning, what are you going to do to remain productive and feel fulfilled? So that would be my advice for an owner. And for an advisor, no, for a buyer, you said. For a buyer, I would look to buy companies that have similar philosophy and core values. So we would want to make sure that if we're going to acquire a company, that it's going to align well with our company so that the integration isn't really painful, because bringing two companies together, whether I acquire you or whether we merge, regardless of what it is, the integration rates are extremely high in terms of failure, extremely high failure rate. And the reason is because they don't come together for the right reasons. And so putting that foot forward, which I know you know exactly about, is going to, everything else will fall into place if you're putting that foot forward.
One of the best decisions looking back was we closed on my business on the Friday of Memorial Day weekend. And I made the decision, even though I was clear about what my next chapter would be, I gave myself 90 days to really do nothing. I didn't start making plans in my new business. I literally took a 90-day vacation and worked on a few projects and hobbies, but had nothing to do with the business I sold, and did not put one toe in the water in my new business. And that 90-day period was a great just time out for me to get some rest and relaxation. And even though I was young, now this year I'm celebrating my 30th year in my current business and living the dream.
That's awesome.
That I had imagined.
Taking that break is so smart, Mark. It's so smart.
It hasn't always been easy.
No.
And so I want to acknowledge the good work that you are doing, because it's so much more than numbers and cents. It can be a perfect storm of tangible and intangible. And I've done some transition work myself. I was a licensed business broker in the state of Minnesota for a number of years. I find that at times you really need to be a psychologist. You need to, you could have all the business smarts in the world, but if you don't listen carefully and respond appropriately,
Right.
It can be a very difficult chapter in trying. I think you used the word quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be a great quarterback to be in the work that you're doing. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and
Sure.
really not so much about your expertise, but I want you to tell us about your business
Mm-hmm.
as a consultant and as an advisor.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I do the math right, you said your transition was in 2010.
It was prior to that. It was in 2000 and I got my divorce in 10. We sold our business in 2008. Yeah. And then I had a job between 8 and 10 and then launched my practice in 10.
Okay. So you're celebrating your 12th year in your
Mm-hmm.
current practice.
Mm-hmm.
How did the pandemic impact your marketing efforts or your business model or how you sell or how you're serving your clients?
Mm-hmm. Well, I published my book through indie publishing and it launched in May of 2020. And I had numerous speaking engagements that all got canceled for the book launch. And so I ended up doing it online. I had a kind of a decent turnout. It wasn't that great, but I did 2 different sessions. Got a lot of good advice from Henry around that. And so we did that. But then I had been researching, everybody had a lot of time on their hands. And I had been researching how to launch a podcast, like how to do a podcast, how to produce a podcast, like what are the best practices, things like that, for quite a while during lockdown. And I thought, well, I can't do any speaking anywhere really other than online. And I'm not getting paid for that right now. So I might as well launch the podcast now. My goal was to do it the following year as a 2021 initiative. And I launched it in 2020 instead. So in June of this year, we had our 2-year anniversary of the show, which is super exciting. And it was a great move. That was one of the pivots. And then the others were just meeting with clients virtually versus face-to-face. And that was an easy transition for the most part. You have to kind of walk people through sometimes how to use Zoom, but now everybody uses it. So no big deal. And we can all laugh about that because we were all there once anyways, right? So learning how to use this thing. And yeah, so I guess that kind of sums it up. One other thing I did, and thanks to Devin and Henry as well on the recommendation to use Kaleidoscope Media Services. They helped me produce my first online self-paced course for business owners. I have an advisor one, but that's with another learning management system. And I don't really run that one myself. But the one I did go through Kaleidoscope with was a great experience. And so that was another project that I got off the ground that was literally on my strategic plan for almost 8 years. I finally did it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Your podcast, how often do you do an episode or a show?
Every week.
Every week.
Mm-hmm.
And I came into your studio to be interviewed, but would I be correct in assuming that you interview people from around the country, or do most come to your studio?
I'd say it's about a 50-50 mix. And I try to keep the balance as much as I can between business owners and advisors. The content that we deliver is relevant for both. But obviously my foot forward is to help as many business owners as I can. But the advisors who listen to the show are listening because they want to be better advisors for their clients, and that's always a good thing. And so I bring them on the show as well to talk about the different aspects of exit planning, share some client stories, and then business owners to just share their story, because we all learn, as I learned from you through National Speakers Association, that stories are everything. So.
Sure. one of the things that I admire about you and both your book and as I poured through your website a bit is the amount of detail that you bring to what I would call the profile of your perfect fit reader or the revenue range of the transitions. I noticed that on your website. Can you tell us about specificity and how that has helped you? And in some cases, has it hurt you?
Well, if it's going to be a client that I'm going to work one-to-one with, then I'm looking for businesses that are somewhere in the lower middle market range, which means anywhere from maybe 5 million a year in revenue at the very, very low end to 45 million a year in revenue. So large enough to be able to pay for services that I would charge for, but small enough that they don't necessarily have a whole team of internal people that are helping them regularly. Like they do have leadership, they do have management, but the owner is still doing a lot of the work themselves, and they don't have a whole lot of time to figure out how to transition. They probably don't have a board of advisors. Maybe they have a board of advisors, but they generally don't have a board of directors. So so that would be, as far as the business owner goes, would be my ideal client size. And then for the online course, I wrote that course because I really wanted that course to attract the smaller businesses that need the help, but don't necessarily have the financial resources to be able to hire somebody one-to-one. So they can take the course and then from the course, jump into a cohort and still get exit planning advice, but do it at the fraction of a cost. And then it's also meant for advisory firms to use it as a lead generation tool, as well as an educational tool for their current list of clients who need to start planning for exit, but the advisors aren't necessarily talking to them about it. They don't really know the process very well sometimes. And having the conversation is not easy, so they just avoid having the conversation with them. They get turned down right away, so they just move on to something else. And so I created the program, and it's actually a white label. It's a licensed product, so it would be branded in their, their logo and things like that. It looks like their own product.
Oh, nice. Very smart. And
Thanks.
I hope people are listening carefully because you're sharing a lot of off the cuff clues about client or audience profile. You know, a lot of professionals are out in the marketplace. I think of as marketing by wandering around. They're looking for a prospect with a pulse and a problem.
Right.
And they don't give enough credit or honor to understanding the profile of their right or perfect fit prospect or client or audience. And you've done an exceptional job with that. I need to ask you about a bold decision you made regarding your book, Poised for Exit. A bold decision, at least I think it was bold. Maybe you'll say, no, that was an easy decision. But Poised for Exit is a great title. But on the cover of the book, you talk about female entrepreneurs. Can you talk a little bit about that decision?
Sure. Well, I have been one my whole life. And as I was researching different books that had been written on the topic of exit planning, when I was thinking about writing a book, I couldn't find anything that focused on women entrepreneurs. I can find very few books at all that are focused on women entrepreneurs, much less exit planning. And I just thought somebody's got to do it. So I knew that it would probably limit me in some ways from kind of the man's world that I'm in, because exit planning is primarily men. You know, business owners are primarily men, advisors are primarily men, but I didn't care. I just felt I have to do this. I have a story to tell. I have my own story to tell. I have client stories to tell. And frankly, from what I know, from the people that I've talked to, most of the people who've read the book are men. So the process of exit planning doesn't change from male to female, but there are different things when it comes to women entrepreneurism, that nuances, right, that are different from what men experience. And I just wanted to address that and call it out, because if men are reading it and men advisors are better understanding of what it is that they're going through, then maybe they can be a little more empathetic and understand when, certain decisions are made in a certain way.
Neat. Well, I just want to acknowledge you, because that is somewhat of a bold decision, and in the LeBlancian world, a great decision.
Thank you.
And we are always encouraging people that the more focused you are, the easier everything becomes, and it certainly helps you in aiming your efforts out in the marketplace. You haven't used this term, but I would think of you, if I was going to describe you, I would describe you as a trailblazer, because you really stepped into an industry and an area of expertise. To your acknowledgement, there are not a lot of women doing what you are doing. And so that puts you in rarefied air.
Thank you. I'd have to say that that's really true. I don't like to give too much credit to myself, because a lot of other people have done great things, and I just follow smart people around, like, following you around. I have learned so much from you and Henry. So you might not think I'm paying attention, but I am. Well, and so, yeah. And I think that that's our job in life, is to do the best that we can with the talent that we have. And even if we're afraid, we do it anyway, right? There's an old book I read a long time ago called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And it made a huge impact on me. So in other words, you do things that you haven't done before, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to be afraid. You just don't let it stop you.
Fascinating. Well, I will keep giving you the credit, even though you might want to give yourself the credit. Thank you. I just have, I think, 2 questions left to ask. In approximately 12 years now, is there an example of a marketing idea that you tried that ended up working better than you thought it would?
That's a good question. I'm going to keep it simple, because I find that a lot of the people that I have done speaking and workshops for, when the advisors, especially, because I've done a lot of that with advisors, don't do this very well, and that's networking. There's a lot of different things you can do to get the word out there on yourself. I think that having a purpose in being able to deliver value, and knowing that what you have to say is valuable, is a good foot forward. And when you're networking, it isn't about how many people you can meet at an event, but it's about knowing as much as you can about the event ahead of time to make sure that it's actually worth your time. So I just call it purposeful networking. And that has made a huge difference for me in the work that I do, because I try to meet certain people. I have conversations. And when I say I'm going to follow up, I do. I try to leave the conversation with a next step, so that we're both understanding what, this went really well. What should we do next? Maybe you call me, I call you, I'll send you this piece, or you send me that piece, whatever it is. And then sometimes you meet people, well, maybe not so much, it was nice to meet you. But I think going in with the goal of meeting 3 or 4 people when you're going to an in-person event is a great way to build your practice, and it takes time to do, but just do what you say you're going to do. If you say that, you're going to invite them to an event or send them information, then do it. It's amazing to me how many people don't do things that they say they're going to do, but don't be that person. So I think that has built, I always said my network is my net worth. And so I think that that has made a huge impact, just providing value and collaborating. Right? No one ever has all the answers, but I think collectively we get pretty close.
Nice. Well, solid gold.
Thanks.
So thank you. Before I ask you the last question, I think you might have something for our listeners or our viewers. Can you tell us what that gift is or what that might be?
Absolutely. I would like to offer everyone here listening or later on watching virtually a copy of the ebook, Poised for Exit. So we'll make sure and get that sent out to you.
Great. Thank you so much. And Devin, if you would be so kind as to make sure that Julie's website is in the chat box, I would appreciate that. And now the question I love to ask or close an interview with is, when you look back on the last 12 years, there was a day one of this chapter. Knowing what you know today, what advice would you give yourself approximately 12 years ago on day one?
Learn how to say no.
Learn how to say no. Okay. I didn't hear that one coming. You're going to need to unpack that a little bit.
I will. And I think that it's probably tied to networking more than anything. And the reason why I come back with networking is because of the work I do. You know, the work that I do as an advisor is a face-to-face as much as possible business, at least at sometimes, right? Working with other advisors and having them trust me and refer their clients to me. Building trust takes a lot of time. And there were people that I networked with and met with because I thought I just had to meet with everybody, you know, and I didn't. And I wasted a lot of time not having an agenda, not really narrowing down who it was that I really needed to network with. And then not being able to say no when someone asked me and I knew that it probably wasn't going to go anywhere.
Well, I love that. And I've always been inspired. You may or may not know this quote, but Warren Buffett is known for many pearls of wisdom, obviously, as one of the greatest investors of all time. But one of his quotes is near and dear to my heart. And it is his quote that successful people learn how to say no. Really successful people learn how to say no almost all the time.
There you go.
And that is just so fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Because as you grow, as you become more in demand, as you become more successful, there are more demands placed on you. And so the art of saying no, and to be able to do it in a gracious way is really, it's a skill, it's an art.
Yes.
So thank you so much for your pearl of wisdom. Like I said, I wasn't ready, but I certainly was ready to be reminded of it.
Oh, well, that's cool. I think when it comes to saying no, you know, sometimes we think that that it's a one-sided thing, that we're trying to guard our time and you know, we have other things to do that are going to be more relevant to our work or whatever, but it really isn't one-sided. You know, if you have the desire to meet and provide value and have good, meaningful conversations and connections, you want to make sure that it's a two-way street, right? So if you don't feel that it's going to be a good move for you to be there, then it's probably not a good move for the other person either. They may not recognize that, but you're saving both of you, right? Not just yourself.
No, thank you, Julie.
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
And thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for inviting
me. Thank you so much, our studio audience, for joining me today, and Julie, and for those of you that are watching or listening to this episode virtually, thank you on behalf of Indie Books International, and that is our site is www.indiebooksintl.com, indiebooksintl.com. And if you are listening to this and you're not familiar with our Indie Books Friends and Family Forum, we will be convening in La Jolla, California, the first weekend of March, and you can get more information on our site. Thank you again for joining us, and that is a wrap.